We're on Daf Ches Amud Beis in the Gemara itself. I'll tell you exactly where in just a minute. And in the Yalkut Biurim, we're up to Samach Gimel. And we finished yesterday with the Achiezer that we discussed in great length, and the Tosas Yishanim. And actually, we turned to Daf Samach Daled. I hope you have Daf Samach Daled. Okay, and we're going to talk about Chai V'Yesed. But first, let's just take a look at a couple of lines in the Gemara. We're up to Amar Le Rav Ashi Le Rav Kahana. So that would be, let's say, right in the middle of the Amud on Ches Amud Beis. The first word in the line is Oleha. It's above Tosas Dibur Maskel Lamed, if that helps anybody, by about 5 lines. Amalei Rav Ashi Rav Kahana Mimai Dahai Oleha Li'isura. We've been spending a lot of time on the extra word Oleha, and we said that that word Oleha is coming to teach us that Soras Achos Isha is Asura. There's no evil. So the Gemara asks Dilma, why not turn it the other way around? Lehetera. That it's coming to teach us that a ribui, that an erva is muteres in a case of a mitzvah, specifically yibui. Now we'll read the pasuk. Lehetera. Isha lachos lo sikach litzrar. What does that mean? Lo sikach litzrar lo hi v'lo tzarasad. And when is that referring to? Shalom b'makom mitzvah. Right? In other words, without the mitzvah of yibum. And then it says lo sikach litzrar oleh, which means that the word oleh is coming to tell you b'makom mitzvah. So the lo tikach litzrar is coming to tell you that shalom b'makom mitzvah. And the word oleh is now telling you that b'makom mitzvah yavo oleh. Right? Because we skip 2 words here that don't appear in the Gemara. There are 2 words in the pasuk that are omitted from the Gemara. I think we should fill them in. It says, Isha el achosa lo sikach litzrar, and then it says Yevamot yavo aleh, meaning in the same scenario in which at the beginning of the pasuk lo sikach litzrar because it's Isha el achosa, so that's prohibiting the tzara of the erev of achos ishta. In that case, Yevamot yavo aleh, and the aleh means that b'makom mitzvah oleh shtein mutaros, whether it's the erva or it's the tzaras erva. So when the pasuk says legalos ervasa oleh b'chayel, what it means to tell you that if it's oleh, which means the oleh of yibum, then she's muteres, even if your wife, whose sister is still alive. So if Kahana answers him, Cain, we're going to have a kasha. And what does it mean when it says legalos ervasa? And the word ervasa is in the singular. Legalos erva dechada. It means of one woman. The Torah prohibits legalos ervasa dechada. Heichi mishkachasla. How would we find a din where the erva herself is asura, but only the erva is asura, not hatzara? And basically, Rav Kahana now is going to apply the logic of Imanif. Iba makom mitzvah shtein mutars, isha lo makom mitzvah shtein asuros. In other words, we cannot be consistent in explaining legalos ervasa in the singular according to Rav Ashi's presentation, because what's it going to be? You're going to have to differentiate somehow between the erva and the tzara. because of the word ervasa in the singular. Now, if you're talking according to your logic, Rav Ashi, b'makom mitzvah, then you're telling me that b'makom mitzvah, Yevama Yavo Alel, and therefore Shtein should be mutaris. If it's shalom b'makom mitzvah, you're telling me that the Torah says Isha lachos l'sikach litzra, they're both asuros, the erva, the achos ishta, and the tzara. We have no choice, therefore, but to assume that Olel is coming to teach me the Isur Tzara, not the heter of the Makom Mitzvah, but rather the Isur Tzara, which we derive from Litzrar. And now the Torah is telling me that only the Makom Mitzvah is there an Isur of Litzrar of Tzara. Shalom Makom Mitzvah, there's no Isur of Tzara. As we discussed at great length yesterday, the erva herself is always asur. Now the Gemara goes back to the Brisa, back on Daf Ches, they quoted Rebbe, who derives the Ptur of Arayos and the Tsaros from Chalitza and Yibum, Gufa Rebbe Omer, because the Parsha of Yibum it says Yivama Yavo Lel L'Kacholo Lishav Yibma, V'Lakach Ulekacha v'Yabem v'Yibma Lesser Tsaros v'Arayos. So Rebbe says that since in the Parsha of Yibum, the Torah says Ulekacha with an extra hey, it doesn't say V'Lakach lo le'isha, but rather Lekacha, and the extra hey is coming as a mute, and then it says V'Yibma, and it could have said V'Yibem, and the extra hey again is superfluous, and it serves as a mute. So we have two miyutim, both of which are exclusions from the mitzvah of Yibum. One is Arayos, the erva herself, and the other is the tzara. So the Gemara asks the following question: how could Rebbe derive an Isur tzara from this pasuk? Midei tzaros ksive hacha. In this context, we don't have any mention of tzaros. The Torah doesn't even indicate tzaros. So it's very odd that you're going to find a mute to exclude tzaras erva from Yibum in the Parsha of Yibum if it doesn't mention a word about tzara. And the Parsha of Yibum is in Kitetze, in Sefer Dvarim. The Parsha of Isha Lachosa Lo Tikach Litzrar is in the Parsha of, well, I always forget if it's Achrimos or Kedoshim. Whatever, it's in the Parsha of Arayos. The Ode, and furthermore, the Gemara has another objection to Rebbe. The Isur Tzaros mean Litzar Nafka. How could it be that Rebbe disagrees with the drasha, which seems to be a straightforward, pshuto shel mikra of litzra? We had a brisa back at Daf Gimel and Beis that from the word litzra, we derive the exclusion of tzara. Actually, it hurt to take a look at Daf Gimel and Beis for a second. Scratch our memories here. I think it's Achim. What part? Do you remember Mitch? Vayikra Yud Ches. I don't have a chumash here.
Achremos.
Yeah. Okay. Good. I thought it was Achremos because I think Kedoshim starts in Yud Tes. Anyway, so right here the Gemara quotes Minani Mili about 8 lines down from the top. On Rabbanan Isha Lachosolo Sikach Litzor Legal Servas Ole B'Chayer, and the Gemara derives tzaros from this pasuk of the Litzor in Parshas Achrimos. So basically, the Gemara is raising 2 objections to the drasha of Rebbe. First of all, he has a parsha which doesn't mention a word about tzara. And secondly, we have an explicit pasuk of litzrar, from which we derive the ptur of tzara. So the Gemara answers that Rebbe holds like Reb Shimon. Litzar mapikle Rebbe lichin Rabbi Shimon. So Rebbe uses the word litzar in Parashas Achronos for a different drasha, and that is the drasha Rabbi Shimon. Okay, so the drasha Rabbi Shimon, I think, we'll leave for a few minutes. It's very, very complicated. Basically, the real heavy Yevamos. Three brothers marrying three sisters. I have a whole diagram for Rav Shimon. We'll get to it in Mitzvah Shem. But let's take a little bit of time here to talk about Chayvei Eseh on Daf Samach Dal. So you'll see a paragraph starting with Madua. You have that? Yeah? I hope by now everyone has a Masifta. I can't buy a Masifta for you. I could, actually, if I had time. Anyway, so he says the following. Yevama Asura Lisyabim, if there's an Isur Lav and an Eseh. Now, in a case where we add an Isur after the Nefila for Yibum, then we apply the principle of Hol ve'ishrei ishrei, kvar hutar Isur eshes ichsheba, and therefore we can be mater ha for Yibum. All this is going to be if we assume that Oleha only applies to Achos Ishto, which is an Itzikaris. But if we have just a Lav and an Essay, then we don't have Oleha, and we can apply the principle Hol ve'ishrei ishrei. And Yesh Latira, because once the Torah was matter, the Isur Eshes Ach, now if subsequently you add another Isur, so if he marries Rachel, let's say Shimon marries Rachel after Ruvain, who was married to Leah, dies, then we would have applied the principle of Hol Vishrei Ishrei, but we have the Pascal Leah. But if we don't have the Pascal Leah, then we go back to square one. We go back to the premise of Hol Vishrei Ishrei. Base Meir, right? His name was Meir Posen. He was a contemporary of Rabbi Akiva. They were always in touch with each other. Very often they disagreed with each other. And the Beis Meir asks from a Mishnah later on. He tells you here that the Mishnah is on Daf Samach Aleph. So Meres Yavam shenaflu lifnei Kohen Hejot v'nismana lios Kohen God. Now she's an almana. A Kohen Hejot is allowed to marry her, but the Kohen Hejot now is upgraded to the status of a Kohen Gadol who's not allowed to marry an almana. And the Mishnah establishes Harei lo yichnos, because in addition to Eshes Ach, which is always mater b'makom yibum, is another Isur of hu isha b'psulei yikach. V'kohen gadol aser b'yavinto mishum she'omedes olav b'isur. Oh, 1 second. Forget about b'psulei yikach. That's an essay. We have a lot. Sorry, almana lo yikach. The Torah says explicitly that a kohen gadol is not allowed to marry an almana. That's an isur lav. Plus, in addition to that, the Torah commands him to marry an isha b'psulei. So he has now a lav and an essay. So the Beis Meir asks, "Halo huter iser eshes ach sheba." And again, in whole Vishra Yisra, we need Kedima, that first there was a heter, and then there was an Isra afterwards. And the heter that came first is Mata, the Isra that comes later. So if that be the case, then when the Kohen Gadol, when the Kohen Hedron, I should say, was upgraded to the status of a Kohen Gadol, now the Isra of Balmoni Lo Yikach and B'sulei Yikach, those Isurim are chal after the matir of Eishes Ah, B'shas Nefil Yibul. So why don't we apply the principle, whole Vishtere Yishtere, Gavaldi Akasha Rabbi Meir, of the base mayor? The base mayor is pointing out that our maskana is against the Mishnah. Well, let's just think about this for a minute. We're going to have a couple of answers here, but I'm going to throw out the following idea. I don't know if this is meaningful, but let's you'll be the jury. When we say whole v'ishteri, we need that it be shemos that are related to each other. In other words, you have an erva, like for example, achos isha. Then the matir of Eishes Ach is now extended to the erva of achos isha. But we're not going to say whole v'ishteri with regard to two isurim that have nothing in common. If it's shnei shemos.
That's what we had before.
Kahuna. Did we have the case of Kahuna? And Nazir. Correct. You're not going to say that if the Torah is matir a Kohen to be matami to one of his krovim, therefore going to be matir a Nazir, if the Kohen is also a Nazir. Those are two shemos. This case, again, in my humble opinion, is shnei shemos. Well, what happened? You were matir Eishes Ah as an erva, and now you want to be matir a Kohen Gadol to marry an almana. That's already a kedushas kahuna. That Isra is engendered by his status as a Kohen. It's no erva over here. I mean, had he not been a Kohen Gadol, he would marry this woman, and he'd be Mekayim in the midst of Yibum. Let's see what the base name says. Whole different answer. Says Mishum Hoel Vishtei Yisrael Lahatilo Ella Es Bia Rishona Fisheba Hu Mekayim Mitzvahs Yibum Below Es Abia Hashnia. I don't understand this because the Gemara is a havamino that if the Yevama is a chos ishto, we should apply the principle of whole ve'isrei ishto. We're not going to worry about bia shnia. Why in this case are we worried about bia shnia? Because there's no mitzvah of yibum in bia shnia. But why? I mean, I don't understand. Isn't he torpedoing the entire application of whole vishrei ishtray to yibum? Because whole vishrei ishtray, according to the base mayor, is conditional on the mitzvah of yibum. You know, this we call dechuya. You remember we used the word dechuya. That whole vishrei ishtray means that if we need to, we'll apply that principle. But if we can avoid it, we'll avoid it. But here we have a mitzvah of yibum. So he's saying, well, that only applies in the first beer. What does he mean that the beer shneir, there's no mitzvah of yibum? Following the logic here. there a footnote here? What does he say? Chof Chetz? He has a Torah here in the bottom, in the footnote. I'll tell you what he says on the bottom. I'm not sure if it's going to help us in our problem. He's saying that the matir is only chala as long as there's an isur. If you have Eishes Ach, and that erva is active, now you can apply the matir of Yibum. But once the Yibum has been consummated and the marriage has been consummated, then there's no longer an Isur Eishes Ach, and therefore there's no longer a matir. And why is there no longer an Isur Eishes Ach? Because there's a new Ishus to the second Ach that replaces the Ishus to the first Ach. And the Torah validates that. So under what circumstances do we say that we need a matir on Eishes Ach? That's as long as there's no new issues to the second Ach. So at that point, we have to apply the principle of matir, to be through the mitzvah of Yibum, be matir, the erev of Eishes Ach. But once he's already married her, meaning the second, we'll call him Shimon, married the Yevamah, so she's Ishta. She's his full-fledged wife. Therefore, there's no longer a matir of Eishes Ach. There's no longer an Isur Eishes Ach. His language is very extreme. He says, Ki'ilu lo hoisa Eishes Achiv me'olam. I don't know exactly why you have to be so flowery and dramatic about it, but again, so I'm just trying to figure out, so under what conditions do we apply the principle of Hol V'Ishtei? I mean, the Gemara does apply Hol V'Ishtei to Yibum, not for the fact that we have the pasuk called Lel. What's going to be? You follow my question? If he, let's call Shimon is married to Rachel. Now he's going to be Miyabim Leah with the death of Reuven. So then every beer that Shimon has with Leah is going to be Achos Ishta from now until death do us part. What's going to be matter then? Elo, what? There was a matter on the Easter Erev of Eishes Ach here, but that matter is gone the very moment he implemented the first beer. I don't get it. It's really bothers me. They call in Hebrew a charba haskala. You ever hear that phrase? I'm missing a piece. Now he writes, "V'gazu bia rishona ought to be a shnir." Because maybe he'll divorce her after the first bia, but we're afraid that he won't. You know, he has an attachment to her. He's intimate, and he'll have a second bia. So in other words, we started with this Mishnah on Daf Samach Aleph. That was the basis of the Kasha of the base Meir. Now we're reinterpreting that. That Mishnah is only D'Rabbanan on a Doraisa level. Even after the Yavam is elevated to the status of the Kohen Gadol, he's Chayav and Yibum. And he will be Miyavim on a Doraisa level. Why? Because Bia Rishona is Hol V'Ishtei Ishtei. Rabbanan said he's not going to be Miyavim because we're afraid of Bia Shnir. the truth is, we're getting a little bit of a preview of sugyas down the line, but I think it's a good idea. I don't know. I feel comfortable about that because Yevamos is such a world. If you get little glimpses of what's coming down the line, I think it might be helpful. It's challenging. Achachiezer pikpek b'tivrutzo. Mishum shahol v'ishtay yishri enu begetter dechia ela heter gomel. So we don't need the essay. Shem sheisar eshes ach huto l'gamre. Ach yechol le'itza sheni lios nito l'gamre. Af li'acher shekfar kiyem es mitzvot. Once again, he's not raising the objection that we're raising. He has another technical objection, and that is that I don't need the essay of Yibum to constantly override the Isurim because those Isurim are completely gone. And that's called the Hutra. Whereas the Beis Meir understood that whole Visha Yisha is only Dechuya, meaning on a case per case basis, we will override the Lotus. The Lotus is still alive and well and active. So you always need, according to the Beis Meir, the essay to be Docher, the Losas, and that we don't have in the Bia Shmir. So there's an unbelievable machlokas in between, unbelievable in the sense of its repercussions. According to the Beis Meir, the only heter of whole issue is the Bia Rishon. After that, he has to divorce immediately. According to the Achiezer, what are you talking about? Whole issue means the whole issue is gone. It's Utra. And for the rest of the married life, the issue is not active. Again, that's only when you apply whole Vishtari Ishtar, which would mean that the second Isur was nolad after the Nefilu Liyim. Because of Achiezer L'Taretz, Shehinen, Yesh L'Tmo, I guess you answer a good kasha with another kasha, right? As far as Agmor L'Davos, Din Achos Isha B'Yevama, L'Din Hoil V'Hutar L'Tzaroso Hutar L'Keri. So we have an overlap of a Mitzora and a Balkeri. Hasam Isa Knisa Lazora, Bein Machmas Hatzoras, Bein Machmas Hakeri, who Mishum Iser Echad. I think what he means is Tumah. Right? You can't be Mitame the Azora. Isha Shnei Shemos Iser Shonim. All right, one thing I'm happy about, he's definitely at this point operating within the framework of the logic that we were operating with. That whole Visra Yisra only applies to one Shem Isa. Just that we thought that there's a hekesh of all arayas for Nichlusu Anafashas Ha'osos, and therefore there's one indivisible, iceberg, one entity of all the arayas. So that makes it Shem Echad. He's not operating with that. He thinks that every erva is a different Shem. So if you want to apply whole Visra Yisra, you could be mater Eishis Ach and then be mater Eishis Ach. You could be mater Achos Isha and then be mater Achos Isha. But Eishis Ach is not going to be mater Achos Isha. Uminon, like Gemara Shekamba Zavrin and whole Vistra Ishtre. What is this Lamed Gimel about? All right. B'tzarech lomar she'af sheshnei isurim shehem mishnei shemos mikol makom hem tluyim ze b'ze. Wow, really breaking new ground over here. Why is it tluyim ze b'ze? She'reim lo natir es ha'isachos isha af Yisrael ach yamu behem. words, it's meaningless to be matir achos isha. I'm sorry, it's meaningless to be matir eishes ach in the case of achos isha. If you limit your heter to eishes ach without extending to achos isha, you're left with nothing. So that means that these two isurei erva are interdependent. That makes it like shema ef. Al kain. Gam b'zeh yishlomer hol v'ishrei ish. The adarabba od adif fei mi hoil. The amriya b'mitzora shara keri. Shom heter atzaras omed b'fnei atzmo. The eno tolui beheter akeri. Why is that so? I don't get it. If you're going to be mat, what meaning or significance would it be to be matit saras if he's also a balkari? And you're not going to be matir as a balkari. How's he going to go into the azor? This I don't understand. I don't get it. Akol ze nachon kach beiser achos ichel. Sharei ma'akev af es heter iser eishes a. Avol Israel monolakoin gadol. Eino ma'akev es heter eishes a. Chayeves hi bechalitza. Sheyesh bo zikas chalitza. Ina asur mishum eishes a. Okay, and ein lahater is iser ha-essay. Ve'eno me also shame iser shebe eishes a. Is that any? Does that sound at all similar to what we were trying to argue? He introduces chalitza here into the equation. We were talking about kedushas kahuna. He's not talking about kedushas kahuna. So again, in the case of an almana l'kohen gadol, we require chalitza. Now, the requirement of chalitza is antithetical to the iser eishes af, meaning if there is a zika lechalitza, then by definition it must mean that there's a heter of eishes af. Which I think he means to say that if it was real erva and there was no heter on the erva, you would not require chalitza. From the fact that you require chalitza, we prove that there's a heter on Easter Eishes af. This is really counterintuitive in a sense. Eishes ach is dafka the one erva that the Torah was marking for the sake of Yibum. But what he's saying is that the requirement of chalitza proves what? That we have a heter on the erev of Eishes Ab. Is that correct? Let me just see if the words fit in. Zikas chalitza. Unbelievable. He's saying that the Erev of Eshesach can be categorized under two different headings, under two different categories. It could be part of the general membership in the club of Arayos, or it could be specific to Yibum with the matir of Yevama Yom Aleha, etc. And how do we know whether or not Eishes Ach should be subsumed under all Arayos or under the specific obligation of Yibum? The nafkamina is going to be chalitza. Chalitza is going to be the proof. If we're going to require chalitza, then it must be that we're operating within the framework of Eishes Ach, as the Torah was matir Eishes Ach, and therefore she's kuka le chalitza, not Yibum in this case, because there's no possibility of Yibum. He's in a, she's an almana and he's a kohen gadol, but the requirement of chalitza. So the very fact that there's a requirement, because if you would have taken Eishes Ach and subsumed it under the universal membership of all arayos, then there's no chalitza. We don't have chalitza in the case of arayos. We only have chalitza in the case of Eishes Ach because the peculiar heter that the Torah was matir in the context of Yibum of this erev of Eishes Ach. The fact that the almana in the case of a kohen gadol requires chalitza proves that there's a matir on the Iser Eishes Ach. Okay, and therefore what? Al Kain, Ein lahatir is Iser Ha'eseh, Sherei Eino may also shame Iser Shebeishes. You hear what he's saying now? He's saying now that our svara of Shnei Shemos, that you don't apply whole Ishtray in Shnei Shemos. So even though the Beis Meir is correct in the premise of his kasha, that there is a matir on the Iser Erev of Eishes Ach, which should, according to Beis Meir's understanding, propel whole the Ishtray, says Reb Chaim Ozi, you cannot go that next step of whole Ishtray because it's Shnei Shemos. In the case of Achos Isha and Eishes Ach, we did apply Shnei Shemos. That's because it's totally Zebazeh. But here he says it's not totally Zebazeh, which that's the point we don't understand exactly why. So therefore, we cannot apply whole Ishtray, even though, again, half of the Beis Meir is correct. The Chaim is accepting the premise that there is a matir on the Erev of Eishes Ach, which should propel us to whole Ishtray. And I'll prove it to you, he says, because she requires chalitza. If she requires chalitza, there must be a heter on the Erev of Eishes Ach. Otherwise, Eishes Ach would fall under the generic category of arayos, where there's no requirement of chalitza. Obviously, we're operating within the specific category and the limits, the straits of Yibum, where there's a matir on Eishes Ach, and that generates a zikas Yibum, which in this case is going to express itself in the requirement of chalitza. So now you want to say that the matir on Eishes Ach should be extended to the Iser of Almana L'Kohen Gadol. And that was the kasha of the Beis Meir. The answer is no, it's Shnei Shemos. And Ein Shnei Ha'isurim Tluyim Zeh B'zeh. What does he have here? Lamed Hey. says, Achli Ido Kisa, Yesh Mokom, Lisvara Fucha, Dafka im Heter is Omed, with Ne Atzme, and Tolabisa, Yesh Lo Lahati, Afis, if Im Shnei Sum Tlim Zebze, Ein Lahatir Es Achos Isha, Mishum Heter is A. Well, Adra Isha Achos Isha Machazik is Isra Isha. I should go the other way around. Instead of saying whole Vishrei Isha, you should say whole Vasire Asiri in the opposite direction. Which, by the way, we had that story, I think, yesterday with Rabbi Chanan, or 2 days ago. So now let's go back for a moment to Daf Chesam and Aleph. And if you could help me just find the words Trei Michad Lo Yalfinon, where is this? Should be about 2/3 of the way down. Yeah. Trei Michad Lo Yalfin. Right? So what the Gemara is trying to analyze here, let's just refresh our memories. We know that the Torah is being matir eishes ach in Yibum. And on the other hand, we know the Torah is prohibiting achos ish in Yibum. And the Gemara vacillates now, which direction should we go? Should we set up eishes ach? Let's go the easy way. Should we set up achos ish as the paradigm, that just like in the case of achos ish, the Torah X's Yibum, that's going to apply to all our rayos? Or should we say the other way around, that achos isha is the exception, and from the fact that the Torah was matir eishes ach, we should say who adin the Torah was matir all our rayos? So the Gemara first answers that lekula, that if you have a situation where you don't know whether we should apply a hekesh l'chumra makshina. So when in doubt, we're makish l'chumra. We don't know whether to be makish all our rayas teishis ach or to achos isha. We're going to do it to achos isha, the hekesh achos isha, because that's l'chumra. Then we get to ibois aim. And the reason why in the ibois aim we should be makish all the rayas to achos isha is because Domos law, that they're more similar to achos isha than teishis ach. And why is that so? Because hacha, in the case of achos isha, trei isure, and in all other arayos it's going to be trei isure, and that's called trei mitrei alfinon. But hacha, but here in the case of eishes ach, it's chade isura. Betrei michada isura lo yalfinon. Did everybody follow that? Should I review that? What we have? Again, if you talk about eishes ach, there's only one isa. If you talk about achos isha, you have achos isha on top of eishes ach. You talk about any of the other rice, you're having any other erev or bito or whatever it might be on top of eishes ach. And therefore, trei mitrei alfin. So the hekesh between all the arayis and achos isha is very, how should I say, very imposing, very convincing. Masha Enkein to be makish, all the other rice, which is trade, Isure, to Eshesach, which is only one Isur, that's more of a stretch. Okay. Tosfos says v'imtom. So we're looking now at the second Tosfos on Daf Ches Amud Aleph. Anyway, I'm just going to start from v'imtom l'Ravasi. We'll see if we have to backtrack. So let's talk about Rav Asi. This is a Sugyan Daf Yud Beis. So Reuven is married to two wives, one of whom is an islandess. And then Reuven dies. Now, there's no mitzvah of yibum in the case of an islandess. Therefore, she becomes what's called Eishes Ach. Right? If there's no mitzvah of yibum, she's Eishes Ach. Now, what happens with the tzara? Tzara becomes a tzara's error, correct? So what's bothering me? On my book, there is Rasa. In the case of islanders, we don't have a hekish because it's only Chadisur. We only have the Isur of Eishes Ach. And we said the hekish is based on the fact that there's a double up Erev, correct? But here we don't have a double up Erev. We only have one Isur. We only have one Isur. So with Mela, we should be matir the tzara. It says to be manavsha ihi asira. Sure why he needs to be manavsha. So the island is asura boy the alfina and meashet tele pratli island. Right? Ashetele pratli islanders. And therefore what? You can't be matir the Isser Eishes Ach. So what's bothering Tos? Lahachi, Sarosa Nami Asura. Why is Sarosa Nami Asura? Because she's in Saras Erev. You know what? This is already Tosfos' answer, right? So it means that there should be a logical reason to be matir at Sarah. Why? Because we said that Chadi Surah Lo Yalfina. Now Tosfos is saying, based on a Miman of Shah, that we will be prohibiting the Tzara. Ihi Asira. And Measher Tele. Pratli Islands. In Lekalak Shvia the Ashes Terrace. Lameachos Isha. Sornami Asira. Isha's Office Shaloh Surabi. Came the Shem after Nikoa Isha's Shalohoya Be'allah. Isha's Minus. Kocha Chashiva Shem. Isa Reuben dies without children. And then a third brother is born. That's called Shalom Bolomo. So now there's one brother that was Bolomo, one is not Bolomo. So the one that's Bolomo is Miyabin. Let's call him Shimon. So Shimon went in, he was Miyabin, the wife of Reuven. Now Shimon dies. And both of Shimon's wives fall from a Levi for Yibum. So both are Pturis Miyibim. Why? Because the wife of Reuven, she is Asura Levi because he was Shalom Ba'olam. And the Torah says, Yeshru Achim Yachta. So now we have the Alfusa for the Erev. Therefore, it's a Rasa Nabias. Hoye Kasha, my time and demand did polig adar of Asi. So Rabbi Yochanan holds on Dafi Beis that the islandist does not patter up the Tsar. He says, Kevon de Lekala Kusha, Le'eshis Ach, Lahatero, Makshina Le'achos Isha, Le'isura. So if I understand correctly, Rabbi will say this is doozy of a Tosfos. But it's good from once in a while we look at Tosfos and we see we don't know anything. But it seems that Tosfos cashes on Rabbi Yochanan, not on Rav Asi. Because Rabbi Yochanan says, Eina island is poteris sarasa. No, why not assume a hekesh tachotz isha? I don't understand why is it so simple to Tosfos that there should be a hekesh here to achos isha when there's only one Isur here involved, Levacious Ah. There's no other Erev here. So the Gemara says what? Chada michada yalfina, right? Trey mitrei, trey Isurei, mitrei is yalfina. Chada Isura, mitrei lo yalfina. Wouldn't this be a case of Chada Isura that gets violent? Why is this Trey Isura? All you're left with is the Erev of Ashes. What's Tosfos saying? That since there's no other Erev here other than Eshesach, then by definition, we should apply the Hekish to Eshesach. I mean, we have no other choice. I mean, you have Samachay? We don't have too much time, but yeah. So take a look for just a moment. Tomorrow we'll do but picture at Tosfos, bottom right. Eich Island is Poteres Sorasa. So I don't know, in my mind, he's asking a kasha of Asi, not on Rabbi Yochanan. Very before, but the Gemara, Shatam Lekach, Shekol Arais Nudos Mechos Isha, Lomeshes Ach, Mishum Sheish Bem Shnei Yisurim. Kain Island is She'ein Bem Eli Isur Echad, Shaleshes Ach, Ein L'Damosa Lachos Isha. Yeah, that's what I wanted to say, but I don't know how to fit that into the words of Tosfos. Tosfos seems to be asking a kasha on Rabbi Yochanan, who says that island is Eino Poteres. Taurus island is no fellas Leivim. I don't get it. So again, I read the Masechet very well. I just don't know how to read that into Tosfos. So that'll be a job for another day. He says, the island is itself is excluded under Asher Tele. Al Afsha Einba Isur Echad, right? Lacheno Seres He Af Tzorosa. But I don't know if he's redefining Tzora and how Tzoras Erva operates, or is he redefining the Hekesh and the rules of Hekesh? I don't know. Sifu Shemitam Ze Af Ish Sachshalo Evolov, but there's Tzorosa. Al Af Shein El Isur Eshes. What is this Mem Zion here? This is a Rosh. I forgot the Ishes Ach Yimon. I don't understand. It's like a cash and a teretz. I don't know. They don't seem to be speaking the same language. They're not talking to each other. The Makshan asks, if there's only one Isur, then it doesn't lend itself to the Hekesh of Achos Isha, which is the source for Tzaras Erev. So what is the answer? Well, once she's excluded from Yivu, even though there's only one Isur, which means we cannot activate the Hekesh to Achos Isha. But why? I mean, if the source for the Isser of Tzaras Erba is Achos Isha, you must have a Hekesh Achos Isha. The Gemara says the Hekesh of Achos Isha only applies in Arayas, but not in Eishes Ach. And all of a sudden, the kasha doesn't bother him anymore. In other words, I don't understand the predicate of the kasha and how the Teretz rejects that predicate. I don't understand how to read this into Tosfos. Started a new project. I thought we were up to Daf Chesam Beis. Maybe we're not up to Chesam Beis. We're still back on Daf Chesam now. So does anybody, so the last page you have is Samachet? Do you want to volunteer to get another 3 or 4 pages here? Leave it open. Okay, then wishing everyone a great day.